Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Hope you had a good lunch. We're going to have a great session here. It's Architecting the Social Enterprise, Realizing the Transformational Potential of Social Business. And I'm not going to go into too much detail because you're going to get a lot more from the panel itself. We have a wonderful panel. I want to thank the panel for being here. I'll introduce Michael Krigsman, who is our moderator for today, and then he'll take it from there. Michael's a well-known industry analyst and consultant who advises established organizations on innovative and strategic IT. He also advises venture-funded enterprise software startups on marketing and positioning strategy. Mike writes a regular column on CIO innovation for ZDNet, where he's written over 1,000 pieces, and he has contributed to the Wall Street Journal, along with several other publications and websites. He's been quoted or referenced in the media about 800 times and appears in about 200 books, or 20 books, sorry, not 200 books. He frequently presents at conferences, records video shows, and loves to moderate panels with super smart guests like the ones we have here. Thank you, and Michael, you may take it from here.
Great. Sudhir, thank you so much. And Sudhir is the person who actually assembled this panel and came up with the idea and herded it. So I have to thank him to begin. And we have amazing panelists, as you'll see in a moment. Today's CIO faces a battle to maintain strategic relevance in the face of economic, technological, and cultural change. Although research tells us that IT budgets are flat, in fact, we also know that the use of technology across the enterprise is increasing in the lines of business, in functional areas like marketing, and even in finance. These changes reflect the evolution of how organizations conduct their operations and interact with their customers. The implications for IT, for the business, and in fact for customers are profound. During the next hour, we're going to explore this new environment with particular emphasis on social business transformation. I hope that we get a real feel for the pivotal role that the CIO can place in driving innovation across the enterprise and helping create a connected, customer-centric organization. So all of this is about social business transformation, which is intimately and deeply connected to innovation. So we have here truly an extraordinary panel, and I'll let each one of them introduce themselves, but I hope you guys listen and tweet, and then we're going to have plenty of time for questions, so ask lots of questions. JP Rangaswamy is the chief scientist at Salesforce.com. JP, maybe say a little bit about yourself and things you're focused on.
Okay. I spend most of my time trying to look at the future of work, particularly in the context of large enterprises and how they engage with information and use information to engage with customers.
Kim Stevenson is the CIO of Intel. Kim, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. So yeah, I think I have the best CIO job in the world because I work for the best technology company in the world, and we're a very proactive, leading-edge type of IT organization. So we do a lot of experimentation, and I'll talk about some of that as we talk about the panel and how that's evolved on the social computing side.
And Laura Bassett has a very interesting role at Avaya, which, Laura, why don't you?
Sure. Yeah. I'm director of our customer experience and emerging technologies. I think where that really comes together for why we're here today is, what are the new innovations that we're looking at, that our customers looking at to influence their business and move forward. And it's really a customer-driven innovations model that we execute. So I also like to think that I have a really fun job. I'm, hanging out with the research scientists, playing with all the new toys and seeing how they apply to business. So.
And finally, Vala Offshore, is your job as much fun as theirs?
I'm not sure as much fun as Kim's, but yeah, really fun nonetheless. My name is Vala Afshar. I'm the Chief Twitter Officer for my company. No, I'm kidding. Normally I'm sitting where you are. listening to the panel and tweeting their wisdom. I am the CMO and the Chief Customer Officer for Enterasys, so I am responsible for both marketing and customer support for our company.
So when we think about social business, I think at times there's this image of everybody in the company using Twitter and using Facebook and kind of shopping online and so forth. But in fact, there's a lot more to it than that. And the whole concept of social business or social enterprise, in fact, is rather vague. And so I think we should start by exploring that concept. What do we mean by social enterprise? And I think JP, who's really kind of you don't call yourself this, but in a sense you're kind of a futurist and definitely a visionary, at least in my view.
I can be a pastist as well.
Okay. So a pastist and a futurist. So what do we mean exactly by social business? What is it? What is it?
I think people have always bought from people. People have always sold to people. Business has inherently been social before technology ever entered the place. But over the last 60, 70 years, for whatever reason, we moved into broadcast models of engagement, hierarchical ways of companies forming unilateral relationships with customers. And that appeared to make sense to some people because the cost of actually recording what a customer said, did, wanted to do was very expensive, so the only people who did it were companies. And we called that industry transaction processing because we only listened to customers when they did something. And that's what books like the Clue Train Manifesto was all about, to saying somehow we had allowed customers to be on the other side of a wall, and engagement between the corporation and the customer became hard and painful. In fact, customers had to fight to be heard. With Moore's Law and Metcalfe's Law and the cost of having smart devices getting cheaper by the minute, we got to the stage where now customers can be connected. They pay for the infrastructure to be connected. They share what they think of what you're doing, whether you want them to or not. They participate in R&D cycles, in problem solving, and in recommending whether you like it or not. That engagement, which is a huge threat for people who think they're in the 19th century, or a huge opportunity for people who want to engage with their customers, is what social business is about. It's understanding that the power has recreated a prior past where it is normal for people, whether in the supply chain, distribution, customers, marketers, etc., to actually have a conversation. Because as the Clue Train Manifesto famously said 15 years ago, markets are conversations.
So Kip Stevenson of Intel, he's talking about, there's got to be a CIO connection here, and he's talking about breaking down barriers with customers. Mm-hmm. And you run an organization of 6,500 people. Mm-hmm. What does this have to do with you?
Well, so here's what I would tell you. So no one has a monopoly on good ideas. And when I think, what is the social business? I think it's sparks ignite passion, and passions fulfill dreams. And I think that's really, to me, what the social business is, that they're there to capture the sparks, ignite the passions of their employees and their customers so that the dreams are fulfilled. And you'll make money that way. So I look at it, from an Intel perspective, as a CIO, to create those customer sparks. They'll tell us what they want in the next generation product. They'll tell us what problems we're having today. And the more we can proactively take that in, we ship millions every month. So, and analyze that. But the same thing with our employees. Our employees have an enormous amount of talent in aggregating that sparks of ideas and stuff to ignite the next generation of Intel products is equally important. So we look at it from both perspectives.
So the concept of listening seems to be integral to this. Mm-hmm. And Vala, that's something that you talk about quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's Andrew McAfee, who coined Enterprise 2.0 and said, tools can help increase information velocity and break down silos. or Peter Kim of Dasha's group talked about a connected organization increases the value to all the stakeholders, customers, partners, employees. It is ultimately, let's not overcomplicate it, this whole social, we just sat through 3 keynotes and social wasn't brought up once that I can tell. And so for a CIO to be relevant, you have to create a culture of connectedness. It's not about social media, but I started my company as a co-op, as a student 17 years ago. And I would walk the aisles as a co-op, and if I saw a vice president or a CX level person, I just kept my head down and keep walking. Didn't know their name, they didn't know me. Today I walk around a 1,000 employee company, and because we have embraced social for the last 4 years, it's hello Vala, and it's, oh, hi John, hi Mary. We've humanized the business. We're a more connected business. And I think people produce and reach their full potential when they feel a sense of belonging. And that's what social produces.
There's a lot of research that shows that the higher level of employee engagement, the more that company will outperform their peers in the industry. So, and that's what that connectiveness is. It represents employee engagement. It means they're more engaged in the company's mission and what they have to get done, and it sort of is about that passion that fuels then the profitability of the company.
Laura, you're the link between Avaya Labs and the product groups.
Mm-hmm.
And so this notion of listening and connection, how does that inform the transfer of technology from the product groups, from the labs into the products?
Sure. Well, I indicated earlier that really we do a customer-driven innovations model, is what we like to call it. And timing really is one of the key things that is either your friend or your enemy when it comes to moving your technology from labs into what I'll call a generally available product. Too early is you're actually spending a little too much money, you're not getting the adoption in the market. Too late, you've missed it potentially. You've missed being that early entrant versus the ability to identify that just-in-time opportunity where you can do things if you take social with leading an opportunity from leveraging the tools to enable the conversations, both positive and negative, whether it's driving revenue or customer service type of inquiries. How can you hit that market at the right time where the businesses are ready to adopt, and paying attention to that, I'll call it internal compass that takes you to the North Pole at the right North Pole, right, rather than the wrong North Pole. But so it's really about making that connection, leveraging the customer proof points and their readiness to adopt the technology, getting those factors of impact to the business, and then you've justified the additional investment to take it out to market.
Mm-hmm. JP, you told us a story earlier that I think is a very valuable one regarding Steve Jobs' view of the CIO. And I think in this context of communication and breaking barriers down, maybe would you mind sharing that story with the audience?
Okay, I mean, it's a long story. I'll only leave the salient part of it in. But my Twitter handle is Jobsworth, and I use the name Jobsworth in many contexts. It came about for my creating a pun on 2 aspects. I was driving the bank I was CIO at to adopt Apple quite heavily around the time when most companies weren't going anywhere near it. This was 2002, 2003 when we were doing the work. And in the UK, a Jobsworth is someone who spends a lot of time telling you where you can't park and that it's 1 minute past 5 and the shop's shut. A busybody who uses the power of his job to come in the way. And I expected a lot of resistance on the project, but I went to visit Apple as part of the project. And I was sitting in a room, we were discussing the reasons why, as a bank, we couldn't use Apple in certain respects and whether they had anything within their sort of project horizons to help us. And at some point in the conversation, Steve Jobs walked into the room, looked at us, looked at me, nodded, and walked out without a word. And so I asked one of the guys, what was that about? Right? And the reply came, Steve doesn't really like CIOs. He wants to deal with real customers. Okay? And for many of us, if we have to be careful that we're in touch with our customers in a CIO role, because you can become a proxy if you let it. But people today understand about listening. Maybe that wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago.
Okay, now let's get a CMO perspective on this, first from Vala, and then the CIO perspective from Kim. So Vala, CIO as proxy for the customer, and therefore not somebody to talk to.
So fortunate for me, I have a very progressive, innovative CIO that I partner with. I can't even imagine the projects that I have right now active on my radar in terms of marketing without a strong partnership with the CIO. I mean, as Kim said, I may be the spark in marketing in terms of what we need, but the flame, the energy, and the heat comes from the CIO. And marketing is, I'm really happy that I have a double E background, because marketing is a science. I mean, from crowdsourcing to gamification to, successful CMOs, no, it's not mobile first, it's mobile only. And so with the social integration and the fact that I'm trying to use business intelligence to create and understand who my advocates are. And we're not as big as Intel, but we have 20,000 some odd customers, and it's important for me to understand their buying habits and so on and so forth. So, behind every successful CMO, there is a great CIO. And you have to cultivate that relationship. I attend his staff meetings, he attends mine. We had Kim we talked to Kim a few weeks ago, and Kim said there's no IT projects, there are only business projects. That's essentially the mindset that the CIO needs to adopt, but you have to really be customer focused. And the opposite of defaulting to no is not defaulting to yes. We do have spirited discussions in terms of how we approach problem solving, but that's part of a little bit of good friction is good. I respect his viewpoints and his technical capabilities, and he understands what I need to do to make sure marketing is successful at our company.
And so Kim, CIO as proxy for the customer, or another way of saying it, which is not so nice, as interference point for the customer. What about that? That's an image, Steve Jobs said it.
Well, so you have to look at the evolution of the role of the CIO. So back in, I'll say 2002-ish timeframe, we were in an era of what I'll call largely IT productivity. And so most IT organizations were focused on a large enterprise, ERP systems installs, driving costs down.
Back office.
Back office types of applications. And there was plenty of business value in automating those workflows, in driving out process inconsistency across the company. However, the world has changed, and we're in now an era of business productivity. IT generally at any company is somewhere in the maybe 1.8, 1.9% of revenue to up to, in the most technologically driven companies, maybe 5 or 6% of revenue. There is 95 other percent that we need to worry about, because you want as much of that to flow to the bottom line. So I think the world's changed, and when you talk about business productivity, it's about customer acquisition, it's about customer retention, it's about the most efficient processes you can have inside your company so that your employees, Intel, we're a big company. We have 100,000 employees, most of which are really, really smart. However, the single biggest problem in the company is finding people and information, because we're big and we work in silos. So what does the social platform that we've rolled out, that's what I'm trying to solve. I'm trying to help them find the people, find the information so they can get their work done so we're most efficient possible. And God forbid, we do something twice in two parts of the company. It's pretty expensive for us to get a product out. So we want to create a lot of reuse of our IP.
So getting back to this core question of what is social business, what is the benefit of it, what is the value of it, what's the meaning of it? Laura, do you want to take
Sure.
a shot?
So I think, if we really look at social business, right, what do we expect out of social in our businesses? It's much more than just a Twitter conversation, right? It's a conversation internally. It's ideas. It's knowledge. It's concepts, right? It's communication. It embeds itself in so many ways across the business. If you look internally, kind of creating a network of knowledge and expertise, along with different topics of discussion, and picture it really as a network, a social network of knowledge infrastructure that you can access at the click of a button, right? That's one impact of it. A social business, though, is and by no means should be limited to the internal impacts of that.
Absolutely.
There's such a critical part that is the external impact of that, listening to your customers, responding to your customers, letting them guide. You mentioned it, Kim, right? Letting them guide the direction of your products and your own innovations and ideas, making them a key piece of that. Really, so much of what we do today is driven by that consumer technology. They have the great ideas, right? They're testing it out first, and so the social business is really going to capture all of that. They're going to capitalize on it, and you leverage that and feed it back in, whether that be for product ideas or if it's an internal social network and your salespeople are asking questions. It's guaranteed that there's probably a customer asking that question. And if there's one customer asking that question, there might be 20,000 customers asking that question. So taking it even to the aspects of creating a proactive communication strategy with your customers through that knowledge and insight that you can gain through the social network. So in summary, I think the social business is the one that capitalizes on all those aspects of what it can bring to the table.
One of the things I just want to add to that is that we need to make sure that when we use terms like social business, we distinguish it from digital business. It becomes social because it's shared, right? Customers recommend things to each other, and that is valuable. If it's internal to the firm, and you have 4 answers to look at in a knowledge store, knowing which one to go to because your own friends have told you which is the valuable one out of the 4, ranked them, voted them, +1 them, RT'd them, given it some prominence within that environment. Right? We live in a world where, I said earlier that everything's getting connected. We also have the ability to have too much information, and you need the filters. Social is a world-class filter, because you then go to people you trust, who know you, whether it's the customers talking to each other, whether it's your supply chain or distribution network aligning itself, or your own staff. Every connected person, part of the reason the value comes is the connection, right? A set of bilateral conversations doesn't make it social, it only makes it digital.
An interesting statistic, about 68% of the customers out there actually trust someone over their social network that they may not have even ever met than they do the person that they're going to talk to at your own company, which I think is just a phenomenal
exactly
statistic.
that kind of
Well, the
Yes.
impact on customers is profound.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. But without customers, where are you?
So we're at a CIO conference, and we're talking about the role of the CIO, and we're talking about social business transformation, and the 4 of you are, in one level or another, real technologists, and yet there's been no discussion of technology. What's up with that?
Well, so the technology is a catalyst, right? One of the panels this morning talked a little bit about speeding up decision making, and when I think about the role of the CIO, you're the #1 change agent for your company, and that. So you need technology as that catalyst for change, but it is the business process overlay. If you just simply automate the existing business process, you really don't get, if you have a one-way flow of your customers and I create a platform for customer information and you don't change anything, it's still a one-way flow. It might be more efficient. So you have to really start to think in transformation mode and how you change the business process. And in this case, in the social side of it, it's inviting people into the game. And in some cases, if you've never listened to your customers before, or you've never listened to your employees before, and you invite them in, what do you think they're just going to come in? Woohoo! I'm so glad to be here. I mean, that's
Then you
what
have the wrong employees there.
right. It's the transformation. You have to bring them through and understand their role in the value creation process. And I look at companies like Quirky. I don't know if everyone's familiar with Quirky, but they do a product a week comes out of Quirky, and it's inventors around the world say, I have a product idea. The crowd votes on whether they think anyone will buy that. If it's popular enough, they produce it, and the inventor, ultimately gets effectively a royalty stream. It's a very efficient process, but completely different way to do product development. That's how I think the impact of social business is going to have on all functions, not just on marketing, not just on sales, but every function in the company is going to change.
Could we say that, would it be true to say that social business is just another, it's sort of a subclass within the general category of innovation? I mean, the social business is just a form of innovation? I mean, because that's what you're really all talking about is an innovation process, actually.
There's a cultural element to it. I mean, order matters. There's culture, there's people, process, and in my view, lastly, technology. And the technology piece is super important because social technologies, for example, social technology we use is Chatter inside the enterprise, which is a mashup of Facebook and Twitter for our CRM solution, Salesforce.com. Chatter allows us to create and scale the voice of the employee and the voice of the department and the organization, but it's also integrated in our workflow. For example, when a salesperson modifies their forecasts in Salesforce, the system chats to us based on complex filters we've created, so that if they're pushing the forecast out, we get a chat. And the chat is based on, for example, a dollar size or a vertical that you're in. But now we have machines participating in part of this collaboration ecosystem. So technology is a huge element, and it creates a much more dynamic. We have unbelievable amount of visibility because of social. My company has had growth for 4 years. We've been a social business for 4 years. Boston Globe last year named us the 4th best place to work.
Wait, hang on, don't mean to interrupt. Do you draw a direct causal link?
Absolutely.
And then I interrupted JP, you were going to.
Absolutely, absolutely I do. There are, from a services point of view, we measure a number of KPIs, and from a customer sat, from a net promoter score, from a number of knowledge-based solutions we created, from a reduction in broadcast emails that went through our business, all of that started when we embraced social technologies within the workflow and within our CRM solution.
I think not just carrying on with what Vala said, but what Laura describes her job to me to be, is that it is innovation, but it's collaborative innovation. We're no longer in an ivory tower world where innovation takes place in that sort of isolation. So if you redefine it to saying that the business is social because it allows people to take out friction, reduce latency, dream up new projects, deliver that, but in partnership. And the tools happen to enable that partnership to happen in ways that you could not do before. But I think of the CIO role within that sometimes also like, I have 3 children, 27, 21, 15. They know everything about everything, but when I watch how they engage, they still don't know how to take backup. They still don't know how to put paper into a printer. They still don't know how to change the cartridge. So there are some things that are part of this new world that require, understanding about security and protection and all that. That is may sound like the negative part of the CIO's job, but it's part of what needs to be done. How do you innovate at pace, collaboratively, and yet keep your customers' data secure? Okay? Those are sort of non-trivial challenges. Yes. So smarts come in both offensively as well as defensively.
Yeah, and I think really what you're saying, and I think what we're all agreeing on, is social tools themselves were innovations. Social overall can drive innovation and enable innovation, right? So there's tools that might be behind some of it, but it's the activity that drives the value.
The humans in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, and just for the record, Val said he doesn't know how to change a printer cartridge either.
Okay, now we have
At least 5 years.
You come to see it.
Sorry, that wasn't public
Exactly.
relations, was it?
Do not tweet that, please.
What you need to learn how to do is change a 3D printer cartridge.
Oh, yeah. We have a 3D printer
Right.
at Terrace.
Right.
2 of them.
Working on it.
So Kim,
It should be more on feeding. It's actually a feed,
Yes.
not a
It
change.
looks like spaghetti to me.
Kim, JP was describing what I have heard people term a core chronic conflict. The conflict being that the organization expects IT to simultaneously be the driver of efficiency and cost reduction while being the driver of innovation and expansion.
Yep.
So that's another way of framing, I think, what you were saying, sort of similar. So how...
Well, you have to be ambidextrous. I mean, at the end of the day, as an IT, so no business value is created from a business project, not an IT project, until it runs really well. So you have to get it into production state where it is really efficient and running well to optimize the value. At the same time, everything that's in production, you have to be maniacal about driving cost out of that. Every dollar that you can drive out of that cost, and that could be a dollar of time, human capacity, or it could be a dollar of server capacity, whatever the case may be. You then reinvest that in innovation, right? And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So to focus on one side and not the other, you will either have great ideas, poor execution, or really good execution with no new ideas.
Yesterday's idea.
Right. And neither one of them are sustainable long-term business model.
See, I love hearing this because this is to me, it's like the archetype of how IT should actually function.
It gets back to the innovator's dilemma, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you justify that expense and continue and carry it forward? It's to maintain a viable business, right?
I also think there's this sort of vibe about the customer's voice not being heard. I know we talked about CIOs in 2000 or whatever, not needing to be as good listeners as today's world demands. But I liken it to saying, customers are, managing products is fun because they don't talk back, they don't complain.
Yeah, they're going to talk back.
Sorry?
We're going to make them talk back.
But until then,
Yeah.
engaging with customers was where the pain was, and the kind of scenarios I try to explain to my kids about this was saying, Kodak was a great company, dominant market leader. Polaroid was a great company, dominant market leader. Both of them reached bankruptcy sometime about a year ago, despite being the domain experts with the smartest talent. That is not surprising in itself. What is surprising is in the same quarter as they hit the last chapter of their bankruptcy and became vehicles for patent trolls, somebody paid $1 billion for a company whose sole business was to make Kodak look like Polaroid. Okay? So why was Instagram worth so much money? And then I say people in Kodak and Polaroid knew their products. People in Instagram not only knew their customers, but their customers knew their customers. And it's the relationship not just between company and customer, but between customer and customer that starts creating that value. A lot of the feedback loops we're talking about saying, I think, either Kim or Laura mentioned about finding problems that two customers say, we know about this problem to each other and help solve it. Right? Laura was talking about saying, we look to the customer to focus on where the new sort of invention or innovation should go. Your Corky example was working on a similar basis. And it's actually not conversation between company and customer alone, but between customer and customer. Right. And then coming back to us. You're talking about how chatter works. What's his name? Jeffrey Moore, right? When he came up with this systems of engagement versus systems of record sort of argument, the tension is we all have to bring those together. Systems of engagement are great, but you're only talking to each other, right? Systems of record are great. They're the books and records of the firm, But securely getting to systems of record as the enterprise social objects, when you're talking about a quotation or a deal that's changing, having access to that securely matters, because computer systems through the 60s and 70s and 80s were built not to be user-friendly. Okay? In fact, the plan was to be the exact opposite, make it as hard as possible to get to it. Telephone systems and mail systems were built to saying as open as possible so that you can add more, because there were network effects. You bring the two together, you get Lady Gaga and sort of thumb drives and many challenges. Okay?
Brought up today.
Which is where things like, when Bala was talking about chatter, the smarts start coming in when you say, how do you allow customers to engage in that form while only being able to look at what they need to be able to look at, and they can be secure that you're looking after them that way. And that's this cross-engagement between systems of record and systems of engagement. And if you do that properly, you're really listening to the customer.
Okay, let's do a lightning round here. And by the way, if you guys think that this is rehearsed, it's not. So, and we'll start with Vala. So, just from each of you, two, 3 points of advice for how people can, how organizations, the CIO and others, can help drive this type of real mindset shift. That's what we're ultimately talking about. So, Vala, why don't you start and then down the line? A couple of points.
Again, I don't want to overcomplicate it. Collaboration can start with just 4 words. What do you think? I have often CIO of my company come to my office, and he's like, hey, there's a SaaS multi-tenant provider doing gamification. What do you think? And we talk about their capabilities compared to what we have on premise, almost on a, not daily, but certainly weekly basis, I find myself in a room with our CIO just evaluating companies. And sometimes I go to him, sometimes he comes to me. But so my advice is be interested. Stay interested.
Great, so be interested.
Yep, and I would say critical piece, complementing what was just said, is around that relationship of the CIO, the CMO, the other business owners, right? Pay attention to those. Many times I've gone into businesses and I'm having to make introduction between those teams and help them understand where that integration point is and stimulate the conversation. So I think that's critical. The other thing I would say is don't be afraid of the conversation that occurs both internally and externally. Let your customers engage with each other. Know the right time to step in. It's really about creating that strategy of engagement. There is a regimented way that you can approach this. Sometimes social technology itself will demand that you do it differently, but you can create a strategy around it and understand what your goals are and how people are communicating about within your organization or outside of your organization.
So we had be interested, and then we had actually
Engage.
create a strategy for, in effect, being interested, for engaging.
For relationship, yeah. So I would tell the CIO community that you have to have a direct track record of excellence performance in order to be trusted by your business units. So if you don't already have that, first you have to build the track record of excellent performance. And then you have to grow into being the change agent for the company based on the strategic outcomes the company is trying to drive to. And whether that be entering new markets and trying to capture a new set of customers, or it is exploiting your existing customers with more products and services, whatever the case may be. But there's only one place in the company that can truly be a change agent across the company in the best way, in a connected fashion across all functions of the company, and that's IT. And so we have to own that responsibility.
I think everyone's given different perspectives on listening, and I want to summarize mine by just 3 points. One, listen non-hierarchically. Historically, we used to listen far too much on up and down the line. We need to get to the right people, and the go-to people aren't necessarily the ones with titles. Okay. 2, listen at scale. Okay. David Weinberger said, the smartest person in the room is the room. Okay? And we've got to start learning how to listen to customers rather than just one, because technology allows us to listen at scale, where in the past we needed focus groups and surveys and sampling. Get to that. And the third element, which Kim brought in her summary, which is really important, is listen while building trust. Okay, these relationships work because there is trust, and everything you do has to at least sustain that trust, preferably enhance it, because that's when we're going to become better listeners. We're going to take better action. So the non-hierarchical, sort of almost, you'd say non-linear way of listening is really important. Being able to do it at scale, which we couldn't do in the past, and not throwing that right away is important, but doing it all in a way that builds and enhances trust is how the CIO, in partnership with the rest of the C-suite, because there is no solo job for these things, does that. But in the end, this listening is not to each other, it's to the customer.
I think this concept of trust actually is so foundational, and we could probably even say that trust is the currency of social business transformation. Mm-hmm. Because if social business transformation is about communication and communicating with customers, communicating with partners, reducing lowering the inefficiency of communicating inside the organization, if they don't trust you, right, they will not listen. They will not engage.
I think that's important. Just an aside on this, people use the word bankruptcy to think it means a failure in monetary terms. Bankruptcy was a failure of trust. The merchants of Lombardy used to sit on benches and talk to each other. If you didn't keep your word, the other merchants came, picked up your bench, broke it in two, and said, sorry, you're not welcome here anymore. The banco that you sat on was rutto. So even the term bankruptcy emanates from a failure of trust, which is what we have to ensure, that we have the ability, the culture, the technology, the processes not to do. And that's where social business is heading. It's a revolution in trust.
And it's a result. Trust is a result.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just something you talk about. And this is where the operational excellence that Kim mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you can't deliver on your promises, it doesn't matter how much empathy and how much accessible you are and how nice and charming you are, you're not going to have a voice, or as we heard a bunch of times, seat at the table. Yeah. During the keynote sessions.
Yeah.
No, seat on the bench.
This table.
That's right. That notion of seat at the table is a very interesting concept, because what it implies, it actually, if I may say this, it seems to me it's a beggar's mentality. I want to have a seat at the table. But actually, how does that happen? What are the conditions out of which that seat of the table arises as sort of a natural consequence?
You're bringing value to the business. You're bringing value to your customers. Yeah. It goes back to that foundational element of trust. If you're not asked to the table, reflect.
So I always describe the IT profession as a services business, right? We sell, in IT, we sell things that are invisible. It's hard to touch and feel information. In a car, I can touch, I feel, I like the comfy seat, I'll buy it. So we sell the invisible, and when you think about the IT profession, I always tell my team, if you do what your customers ask you to do, you probably get to keep your job, but you're never going to be a rock star in IT. If you do what they need, but they don't know how to ask because they're not IT professionals, you have an opportunity to create value for this company. And if you do what they think is impossible, but because we understand the technology and we understand the company's business process flows, they think it's impossible and you can make that happen, then you get to be a rock star in IT. And then you are helping the company transform. So it's sort of, and I talk about it in 3 levels of leadership. And I really believe that's the profession that we're in, is you have to walk up those levels of leadership.
Kim, we're going to get to questions shortly. I have a couple of more that I'm as interested in asking questions of these guys as you are. But so in just a minute, we're going to have some questions. But Kim, during a conversation recently that you and Val and I had, I was trying to give you a hard time about shadow IT.
Oh, yeah.
And you had a great answer. And maybe can you share with us your views on shadow IT?
Oh, so yeah, I believe that shadow IT only exists because we failed in some way to deliver the business what they need. It's a fundamental breakdown in trust, and so I don't consider shadow IT bad. I think that they're there to fulfill a business need that IT has not been able to fulfill, and so we effectively it's a cause and effect relationship.
So the
And they have
notion of
groups
being.
on Chatter.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Say it again.
I said, and they have groups on Chatter.
We don't have too many in Intel anymore. There were some, but there's one or two groups, and I went and I talked to them, and I said, "Really? Do you call yourself embedded IT for supply chain?" And they said, "Yeah, that's our name." I'm like, "Why don't you rename yourself to something better, like supply chain value solutions or something? I mean, what you really do." So, I find it to even be a demoralizing name, but it's interesting how it's evolved. But it's evolved for that fulfilling of business need problem.
Well, you can relate it to what your customers do when they want to get answers today, right? They're out there researching and doing things on their own. If the information isn't readily available from a particular search, are you providing them the insight that they need? Are you listening to them and talking, and engaging with them? So they're going to go out and do the same thing. They're forming their own communities, right, to enable themselves to get done what they need to get done. Or they're going to your competitor or a different product.
Okay, so you talk about customer, which then brings me to another question that I've been waiting to ask JP.
You're welcome.
Well, I figure what better time to ask these guys questions that I'm interested in as well when we're in front of an audience and being videotaped. Don't feel like you're on the spot.
No.
No pressure.
So Salesforce has been talking about itself
We changed everybody's names before we got here.
Yeah, it's all random now.
We should.
That's right. We should have put our Twitter handles on the.
we should have. Next year.
So Salesforce has been talking about itself as being the customer company, and that's been a theme throughout this. So what's the connection between this social business transformation and this notion of a customer company?
I think the connection is quite simple. It's called the customer. Okay? When we came with messages like the social enterprise, what we were trying to do was to say that the technology was in place, the tools were available, and the demand from the customer to be heard, to be listened to, had emerged through those tools. There was a transformation taking place. Already the volume of conversation in social networks exceeded that of email over a very short time. Right? More and more of the information people needed to make decisions inside a business were actually persisted as information outside the business. So things had to change. And connecting your customers, your products, your supply chain, your distribution network became part of the way to be more effective listeners, to make sure that you were listening at scale, to make sure you were listening non-hierarchically. Okay? And that was the drive. And when you become a customer company, I mean, I'm reminded of what Peter Drucker said, the purpose of business is to create a customer. A customer is someone who comes back to you, okay? And comes back to you not because you've locked them in, but because they trust you and they like what you do, and they feel they're participating in the creation of services and for the solving of problems. Because the last time I looked, customers aren't dumb, right? And there are many customers around. So especially if when I look at things like, say, what FedEx did, over a decade ago, saying they used to get a whole pile of phone calls and asking, "Where's my package?" And they didn't know what to do. They said, "Look, customers, why don't you look for yourself?" And suddenly, their call centers could shut down because customers were entirely happy and competent at being able to find their package themselves. So sometimes, as companies, we have to learn how to listen better and to get out of the way. Right? For many of our roles, whether it's CIO or CMO or even CEO, right, we have this implied common need to saying when everyone's empowered, trust and get out of the way. Okay? We have to learn to get out of each other's way because we're partners in some ways, et cetera, saying, who decided that one person knows all the answers? Right? That's what doesn't scale, but that's what characterized half a century, perhaps more.
And that's really taking off today. They're the new CEO, the Customer Experience Officer, right?
Yeah.
Whose role
Your
is,
title.
whose role is their purpose in life is to understand the experience of that customer at every stage in that journey, right? That customer journey and how and when and where they need to engage with you. Combine that with the technology of all the different places and ways that they prefer to do it. And how do that person's role is to understand how they create that seamless experience across all those mechanisms, right, in the very mobile society, right, that we live in. And so it becomes yet a more important thing for businesses nowadays. And we're seeing this, across the board. When I ask audiences, right, how many have a customer experience officer, chief customer officer, right, customer strategist, something like that. It's more and more. It started out with 2 people in the audience, right? Now it goes to maybe half of the audience, right? So it's depending on where you are, it's growing.
So trust and customers are the pervasive theme so far, big time. Questions, anybody? Sir?
Gary Beach, CIO Magazine. Val, you had mentioned one word that wasn't mentioned this morning on the 3 keynotes was social. I would counter that one word I've not heard anybody here talk about is security. And to some extent, for me anyway, the social business is on 3 pillars. It's people to people, like you and Kim were talking about. It can be people to devices, we all know what that is. And of course, increasingly, it's 21 zettabytes of data being created each year. It's machine to machine. So my question to you is, how do you secure the social enterprise? What are the challenges?
So I just want to give you an example right now. I have a CIO, or multiple CIOs, that have connected their network management system, we sell enterprise networking products, to our call center through Salesforce Public Cloud, where this network management system is chatting to us anytime a fan or a power supply fails. And we get that chatted message, parse the message, create a help desk ticket, and chat back to them. Our entire frontline service model is machine to machine over a public cloud using social technology. And we rely on the SAS 70 compliance and all of the security measures, including enabling 2-factor authentication and scratchpad social construct where we can erase the chats over a pre-configured time period. But we have gained the trust of a CIO whereby he's not spending now less than, instead of 70, 80% keeping the lights on, doing these RMAs, return material authorizations, automagically through machine-to-machine communication. So, and I would argue most cloud providers today have better security than on-premise solutions, given the scrutiny and the fact that their business models depend on having that reliability and trust. So, there's a lot. It's a big topic that you mentioned in terms of security, but I would say more and more, my customers and certainly us at Intersys are comfortable that there are enough security measures to ensure that we have a good sound model. We as a company moved to the cloud 10 years ago. And again, we had a lot of spirited discussions 10 years ago when we moved our sales and services to a cloud model. And given the history of reliability, I don't think that's a major concern. Now, these are university CIOs. It's different in financial, in healthcare. So each vertical has a different set of governance that you have to account for.
Great.
So I'll give a different view. So we have a multi-pronged strategy around securing our social activities. So the first is all of our internal stuff is inside our internal firewall, et cetera. So as you would expect. But we spend a lot of time as a company helping our employees to understand their personal threats, not just to Intel, but we have, of course, we have blogging guidelines and social guidelines and stuff, but we also help employees understand, how do they protect their own identity out there in the social world, and things that you might think are obvious aren't really obvious to every employee. So
So we do that. And then we do a lot of proactive monitoring. And so we have our high-profile executive targets, and we scan for, basically, false activity that are out there. And there, trust me, we have some big targeted people. So I find frequently activity that's going on that is not real, it's not them. We call the social company right up, we get them to remove it. It's a constant battle. So you can't ever let your guard down. Our intellectual property is our core value. All of that resides on premise, and in some parts of Intel, it's even double firewalled, so you segregate even within the company. So we're very careful, but it's increasingly a problem. It's more and more sophisticated. Just as our capabilities grow, so do the people who, start after the threats. There's a real business in selling information and identities, and so you just can't ever let your guard down.
Great. Question in the front.
Hi, I'm Mona from Thomson Reuters. I do emerging tech. I have a question about how do we manage findability within the walls of the enterprise? We're finding as a company of 60,000 people that we've deployed a fantastic tool, but findability is horrible, so that we can't reach each other the way we want. So it looks like the technology is lagging what the desire of the features are, and if any of you have found a way to solve the now increasing problem of complexity in the network.
I think going back to the discovery and transaction cost, search cost elements within any sort of defined domain, right, you're looking for three things to happen, which, if technologists have got it right, should happen. So if I speak for my own company, I know where we are with that. One is that you need to be able to make sure that there is an ontology and a taxonomy to be able to describe topics, to be able to describe skills, and there is time taken to get that right. Without it, you're just searching in a haystack full of needles, and you don't even know to call it what kind of needle. Right? The second element is, it's not just finding it, but today you have to find it at speed. So when you find at speed, that's where I was referring to social as a filter. So if I've got 10 minutes to go and I'm told I'm going to meet somebody from the aerospace industry who wants to talk about what Salesforce can do for them, I go to Chatter and I say, guys, how quickly can I get a dump of what we have done in this sector? And I land up with 4 decks to look at. And I've now got 5 minutes to go. I don't have the luxury of looking at 4 decks. But I can look at the likes that are associated with each. I can drill down and see who are the people who've done the liking, because not all likes are equal. So influence needs to be understood. And then say, that's it. I've now got 3 minutes, but I have found the one. Right? So the second element of findability is bringing the social filter and signal in. And the third element is it has to be delivered to you where you are and when you are. So you have to understand that, like Apple and iTunes solved one part of the complexity of music by saying that they're going to give you Spotlight type search, followed by delivering it to you wherever you were, whenever you wanted it. The same needs to be happen with our social networks at enterprise level. And I know what I use Chatter, and I wouldn't be using it if I couldn't do that. But otherwise, it's like saying you've got a filing system. 15 years ago, God forbid, if I had filed an email and I tried to find it 3 months later, okay, it was death warmed up, because the structures of the time, the trees, the inability to tag, no social context provided, it was a nightmare. Today, I can do it multi-channel. Okay, so I'm sorry you're in a situation where you can't find it, but I think much of technology is there today to be able to solve it.
I would agree. I would suggest the problem is probably one more of the metadata. The metadata you probably have is things like job title, location, phone number, maybe an email address.
You said you'd make sure I wouldn't fall asleep. Sorry.
I'm thinking you're getting
You're probably
computer-
looking to find something other than those things.
Like
and
skill, interest.
skill, interest, passions, last customer contacted, those types of things, which become your new metadata. So as an IT profession, we have got to look at unlocking our conventions around what, in this case, search, right? And then people have to opt in. I have to, you can't assign what customer I talk to last. I have to opt in and be willing to be a content creator in that environment. And that's how you get, and we're starting to get traction on that. 30% of Intel employees are actually active content creators in our social environment.
So you've just received computer consulting from the chief scientist at Salesforce and the CIO of Intel. That's pretty good.
I can't help but riff on one thing that Kim said. This idea of opt-in. Okay, today, if you want to imagine what work is like, historically a hierarchy was needed because these hierarchies were designed between the two wars with a lot of military knowledge and experience to say, how do I set priorities? How do I allocate resources? How do I monitor feedback, progress on those priorities? And when do I intervene? Right? That's what we set hierarchies for. Today, because work is no longer linear, it's non-linear, it's lumpy, the domain knowledge needed to make a lot of those decisions cannot be sustained in a hierarchy. It's much more valuable in a network. So people opt in. Okay, so you land up with people choosing who they want to work with and what they want to work on within an overall domain that is still set by senior management, because you can't just randomly do anything you want. Companies have some sort of values and ethics, reasons to exist, a customer base. And I think that, what I'm really describing is a video game. So you choose the genre, and that's the kind of company. When you go into a massively multiplayer video game, how do you choose? You walk around for a while and then you find the people you want to play with, right? Then you choose missions or quests. And then technology checks whether you have got the ability, the skills match. You can't play level 42 unless you've done level 41, right? The same is true at work to say, you need to have shown that you have the domain knowledge and expertise to get there, I've had medical operations. I look very carefully at the badging of the guy doing the operating, that he's qualified. Right? I have a pacemaker. It is not open source at present.
All right. And with that, sir, we have another question here.
I actually wanted to really quick, if I could, comment on the question that came before. There are elements being built into technology today around leveraging context of the person, of the profile of that person, of their friends, of your friends or team or whatever it is. They're becoming inherent to the technology. This is where hanging out with the labs guys, gets fun, because you see the advent of that and how it impacts everything you use today. Whether it's, I receive an email, my context is the people that are on that email, the people that I'm communicating with them, the meeting that I have coming up later, the documents that we've shared together, right? All of that context comes to findability, right? And then when you add that, you layer that into tagging and embed that into those applications, those collaboration applications, and inclusive of social, you really begin to form a different story around findability. So I just wanted to layer that on.
Great. So ask your question quickly, and then you guys give relatively short answers because we're running out of time.
Okay, I think we're being scolded.
I'm Carlos Salonki from Produban. So quick question. What are the opportunities and risks for social business on high regulated industries like financial services and pharma?
Okay, I'm happy to take it on if you want. When Vala mentioned Andy McAfee and Enterprise 2.0, he actually did the first 5 studies of that on my department at the bank. And that was before we had Facebook, that was before we had Twitter, but we had blogs, we had wikis, we had instant messaging. So at that time, people were giving me a lot of grief about saying, how dare you use these leaky technologies in a regulated world? And I said, do me a favor, guys. All this, going back to what Laura was saying right now, And what Kim referred to earlier, context is captured very cheaply compared to the past. You get audit trails that tell you the whole story rather than bits of the story. So you know, all you have to do is even upload a photograph on Flickr, and you're sending an EXIF file that says, focal length, device use, time of day, something like 70 different attributes. Everything on Twitter is auto date and timestamp, geolocated, comes often with a compressed URL for context. And if someone's had the discipline to do something about it, some semantic tagging to go through with the hashtag, all that means that in regulated industries, we finally have the ability not just to capture transaction, which is letter of law, but conversation, which is spirit of law, adequately enriched with the context in a way that regulators would sort of give their left arm over. So in 3 years' time, when you see a lot of right-arm regulators, you know I was right.
Great. Question over here?
So after listening to all of you, I think everybody's going to go back and architect their social enterprise, right? But this is such a dynamic field, especially where tools and technologies are being deployed. And I'm very interested to know, how do you keep up with that? Because today it's Facebook and Twitter. It's not going to be that 2 years from now. It's going to be something somebody's building in a garage somewhere. How do you do that, and how do you move an organization, and maybe Kim, you could answer, like Intel, to adapt to something of that dynamism?
Yeah. So it's an excellent question, because we started out 4 years ago on a social platform, didn't keep up with it, and in 2 years it was out of date, right? And so then it's a heavy lift. So here's my advice: is you have to start somewhere. Start in an area that will have high appeal to your organization, whatever the problem is you're trying to solve. You can pick a SaaS solution. If you don't have to be locked in. Our strategy now in my organization is we're dissecting the organization. So our sales organization needs something quite different than our design engineers. And so we're doing solutions that are fit for the community that it's going to support. And when I say sales, I mean everyone involved in sales: the finance person that works on the deal, the sales leader, the post-sales support, technical support person. So it's a big view of sales. When I say design engineering, it's the same thing. Customers are in our design engineering community. Why? Because they're going to design PCs or phones or tablets based on our sample parts. So it's a very big view. And I think if you have the ability to do that and segment a little bit, your relevancy over a longer period, and then a lot of these companies, they're the ones that want customer input. Engage with them in a partner mode. Don't let it be, I'm the customer, you're the vendor. Tell them what you want, because then their roadmap will, again, it helps you stay relevant going forward, and you're not going to do a rip and replace in 2 to 3 years.
Well, it's 3:59, and I don't think we have time for any more questions. But I want to, first off, thank these amazing panelists. And thank everybody for attending. And I'm sure these guys will be around for a few minutes, so if you have questions, please come up and ask. Thank you.
Thank you.